gang, welcome to Friday's Forward Focus. I noticed that all through January, I had 2019 on our opening slide date. Whoops. I've got to go and do some updates on those. Goodness. Here we go. We'll have to update our copyright too. Wow. All right, you guys. So I hope you are all having a wonderful week so far. Hello, Brando. So the market has been quite something this week, hasn't it? We've gotten a lot of activity here, especially for those of you that are trading Tesla. Holy cow. Has anybody here traded Tesla this week? I'm just curious. Yes, Karen. Oh my gosh. How'd you do? I hope you did well. We will take a look at it here. Very well on the ups and downs. That is awesome. I am glad to hear that. All right, gang, I am gonna flip on over here. As you can kind of tell, I've got a little bit of a scratch in my throat here. I've been sick this week, but we are gonna power through here. All right, you guys. And also today is the 7th, right? Whoops. Oh man. You know what I did? I was because I copied and pasted the I copied and pasted the date from yesterday's slide. Ha, oh my gosh, I need more sleep. Okay. All right, let's get started here. So, what do you guys want me to take a look at today? We'll do all about you. What markets do you want me to look at? Start with the NQ, and we got the spiders and the Dow, all the indices. All righty, we can do that. Gold, oil. Okay, I am gonna close up some of my other programs here, and we will take a look at all of those. All right, so I'm going to start with the S&P 500 to begin with. So we'll look at the ES, the futures contract for it. And I'm just going to back this on up here. I'm going to add in you can see what we've got going on the 8,000 tick here. Basically, this just shows the action for the last couple of days. So we had a pretty decent avalanche pattern here, but it went a little bit later than usual. So you can see right about here is where you would typically get that avalanche happening, but it was going out through more of a base. So this allowed it to do just like an extra little spike in there. And things just didn't get going quite as much as we would have seen in some of the other avalanches. So it's kind of shifted momentum here. Nice little 2B here today, going into today. This is really indicative of something that's going to trade more into a range as we head into the weekend, just continue that range as we go into next week, barring any news that can break it out of the range on Monday. But for the rest of the week, I expect this range to hold here. So I'm going to pull up some of our larger time frames here. You can see a little bit of a change in the momentum there coming out of that avalanche. But overall, momentum has been slower on the downside because of how rapidly this went into high. So we had a two-wave measured move. It triggered a reversal off of the high that was really similar to what we had happening on the NASDAQ on the smaller time frames in here. I was trading that here just a second ago before we went into our class. See, I've got a chart up there. Come on, where is my NASDAQ? All right, I'll just pull the NASDAQ from over here. So look at how steep this kind of went into the highs here, really rapid move. So what tends to happen is you can get an initial move down that can look great, but then it takes a little bit of time for it to work out and put in another move. So right now and today on the NASDAQ, what we're looking at is what's going on here. And here's a little baby 2B here, kind of turn things around. I pointed this out, and the room is basically the opposite of our 2T that flipped it here. So really similar activity on the 60-minute as we saw on just like the 10-second chart here within the last half an hour to an hour or so. So you can see how this has kind of, continued to pull up into here. That's what I'm expecting to happen here on the ES as we kind of continue forward with today's action. So let's go up to some of the larger time frames though. We're going to take a look at this on like the weekly, even go up to the 1-month chart here, add some of these other charts here. I was playing around with some different markets on my computer over here, so I don't have those charts up here yet, so we'll give it a second here to load. Just add a bit more. Then I'm going to take this off here for you guys. So what we're seeing is that this is kind of trying to come into, we're hitting that measured move zone that we've been following basically for a couple of months here. Let me show that on here for you guys. So we've got this overall larger move here. This is kind of what we're aiming for. And we're falling a little short, really close to what oil has done. I'm going to grab oil here, show you this comparison chart on what oil is doing right now, because the intraday chart on oil on a 500 tick is almost identical to what we have here on the daily chart on the ES. So here, let me see, where can I put this? I'll put this over here. I might have to move it around for you. But what you can see is we have a main move up. That's the move up that's kind of hidden behind the chart here. And then we have this congestion where it's still kind of tilted on the upside. That's what's under the chart right here. Pull back here, and then the breakout. Now what's different is there's a little bit of a pull in here, and then we're up at that 76.4% extension zone. So I'm going to make the chart on the oil a little bit bigger right now. So you can see what we've got going on up here at the 76.4% extension on oil on the 500 tick chart. And this is really similar to what's happening right now on the daily time frame on the ES. So in oil, this ended up pulling this all the way back down into the congestion here, where we're now getting another reaction. It's kind of widening up again. But it could have also done something where it could have had something like a momentum reversal. It could have gone into a megaphone. There's a lot of different patterns that can happen up there between the 76.4 and the 100% extension. So what it really comes down to now as we watch things going forward over the next couple of weeks is what happens to the momentum within that zone of congestion. So what we saw on oil was that this did a check mark type of short pattern on this 500 tick, which was actually cleaner on like a 200, but that shifted the momentum. And then we ended up with a tilted avalanche leading to the further downside. So that is a possibility here on the S&P 500 on the daily chart. But we would need to see another flush or something to get that to try to develop. So right now, we're still up at that second high here, which means that this can still pull forward. You know, there's nothing that has dropped this sharply. We don't have that inverted check mark that's leading to selling yet, but we have to be aware that the possibility is there. So we're looking at those smaller changes in momentum now on the intraday charts. They will be somewhat visible on a daily time frame, but they're going to look a lot better when you drop down to like the 240 or the 20,000 tick. Those smaller time frames that are using some of the intraday charts, well, I guess they're larger intraday charts, but smaller compared to the daily. Those are going to be the ones that we want to watch now. So let's look at here. I'm going to switch this up. We're going to make this a 240. And what you'll see happening here at this high is that, you know, really this has the possibility it could go into a megaphone, but it's a little bit on the steep side. So maybe like a 2T or something here could bring it back up. It could develop into a shallow or avalanche, kind of pull it back down. I'm kind of aiming more for this to play around here and pull back up though. That would be my guess based upon what we're kind of seeing. Just because even though this is pulling back slower than this upside, it's still a pretty decent momentum, pretty average momentum there. So if this, you know, pops up, we could get like a 2B type of something that could pull this back up. We could even get this trying to go into like a megaphone as a continuation that would do like a 1, 2, 3 on the larger time frame, and that would pull that higher back into that 100%. So really a lot of possibilities here, and even like the 240 really isn't showing us too much. It did show, hey, there's a little shift, we got a little bit of an avalanche, but it doesn't show anything as far as like a pattern here yet. So kind of keeping things, you know, a little bit closer to the vest here. You don't want to get too heavily invested in, you know, something that could chop around here. Basically, I'm looking for a smaller time frame setup that could develop into a longer time frame position for those of you that are swing traders. But right now, there's just nothing to give me a swing trade setup. If there was any setup, it would be on the short side right now, but it would have the possibility that it could go into that congestion here. And for those of you that just followed me in League of Traders, when I took a short that was kind of like the equivalent off of the high up here, I piecemealed it into two separate trades. So I didn't really want to hold through that congestion and have that potential that I could just get chopped up in there. So let me show you kind of what I did on that so that you can use that as a guide for the type of action that you can do in here. So I'm gonna go up here, all the way back up. I actually am still long on Russell. See if I have that. Here's kind of the original. Here's when the Russell was coming into resistance, but here's the original short position that I took on the NQ. So I was long the Russell at the same time. We had a lot of traders that were long different indices because basically they were all giving setups at that time. And then I saw this happening, and we had been hitting the 76.4% retracement on the larger time frame. So there was a lot of resistance here. You can see a couple of different fib levels that I had on my charts. And it had a really beautiful 2T setup where it had a little baby avalanche in there. So I shorted up in there. Right here, here's my entry price. I went in all at once, and I didn't have what I would take as a normal full position. It was about 4/5 or so of what I would normally take on a position. So took that short, but then the momentum began to shift here as it was coming into the first support level. So since this was a shorter move here than here, this move, if it was going to do well, should have actually picked up momentum. We'll talk about this more when we go into our trends development next week in League of Traders. So the expectation was this should have flushed faster into this level right here. So I was looking at 9448 zone, 9450 zone. That was my target zone for this initial turnaround. Basically looking at this to do like this as a two-wave correction, and then have an increase again in momentum on the downside there, and then maybe shift in and do something like that that would bring it down. But since it started to shift faster, I used that to close the trade and get out of it here because it had two smaller little baby moves. So this popped it, and then let me show you what happened. So at that point, here we can see oil. So at that point, that flipped me. I took that out, closed that one, and then I waited. So what I wanted to see at that point was some sort of avalanche form. This isn't a typical avalanche, so it might look a little bit wonky for you guys. Basically what it had was another two waves down. It pushed up, and then when that channel broke, I took that short as being resistance back into there. So that was a little bit tricky to get back into that. And the problem of when you break something up into smaller patterns because you know that it could have a slower overall trend is you might miss the continuation. And that is totally fine if that happens to you guys. I know sometimes people can get a little bit emotional about it, especially if you're newer in trading, because you're like, oh, I knew that was going to go into a longer correction, but I didn't want to get chopped up. So I got out of it and was looking for another trade to get back in, and I just didn't see it and it went. Don't worry about it, you guys. There's going to be something else. You can't say that enough, but it's true. There's going to be something else on the horizon. So don't get stuck on that. So what's happening here on this 200 tick though, this is the same type of action that we could see end up forming on the much larger time frames for like the 240-minute and things like that, where we can get another move forming, but we could have this congestion happening here first before that happens. So keep that in mind. There was a little baby 2B here. That is what ended up getting me out of the position. And it looks like that ended up holding that low too. Here's the little baby 2B. And see here, you can see the details on what I used to get into the trade. So you couldn't see this on a larger time frame, but it had a really rapid flush to start and then a little pattern we call a check mark. And that's what I used. So it did have a confirmation move for me. It just wasn't like your typical, this is what it would, look more like in like a textbook fashion. It would look like this. It would have two waves up, two waves back down, two waves in the range, and then it would do your break. So same time development that you would expect. It just wasn't like the cleaner waves. So that can serve as a guide. This was my Russell, but that can serve as a guide for what to look for at this point. So this could go into, for example, that zone of congestion in here, and then do another breakdown that can bring it into the support level over here. Let me move my room there, get that out of your way. So that can bring it back down into that support zone. So that's a possibility. We just have to watch those smaller momentum moves within this congestion. So let's pull up, I'll kind of do the NASDAQ a little faster, and then we'll get into some of these individual stocks here. Here you can see where that little baby 2B took place. So here's our daily on the NASDAQ. As you can see, we're pushing up. We've hit those higher target zones that we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks as the potential targets because of the way the momentum was playing out. I'm going to flip this over to a weekly so we can see that a little bit better. So what we've been watching here on the NASDAQ is this move for a first target level, which you can see there was a bit of a reaction off of it. So we were looking for about that 2230 thereabouts was our target zone on this for a measured move. And we also looked at, hey, where would the resistance be if we use that last little low too? So we've gone back and forth. The first one is the main one that we used right here. And then this one we also looked at to give us a zone of resistance, and we are just hitting that upper zone here today. So you can see that this has really extended this trend at this point, but the momentum has picked up a bit too. So it does have the possibility of pushing this resistance level a little bit. And on the bigger time frame, it won't necessarily look like a lot, but on the intraday and daily charts, it might look like a ton. So we're really looking at this as a momentum type of move right now, and you want to be very cautious betting against that momentum. So reversal plays, because the momentum increases, a lot of times they will start out, slower and choppier, and they can go and pick up momentum, but can start off choppy to start with. So in general, you still want to keep trading with the trend, but you want to watch the larger intraday timeframes for momentum shifts to start to happen, and for those measured moves on things like the 20,000 tick or like the 240 tick. We don't really have anything going on here on the 20,000. So what I was looking for even last night was that, this could even try to hold here and pull back and do something where it kind of, shifts the momentum, comes in here more. We didn't have a clean 2T because it didn't have the measured move to a higher high there. So that would have been a good short pattern. It just couldn't make it up to that high. So there's not a clean pattern here except for this as wave one up, this as a two-wave correction, and then this as a potential for another move up. So right now, what is happening on the 20,000 tick is that it's showing that can push through that that Fibonacci level on that daily time frame and the weekly time frame by just a little bit, and still bring that up there, and that's where we could get a 2T forming. So right now, that's what I'm looking at as the potential as we head into the weekend. So focus overall is more on the long side, even though you saw intraday, yeah, I took a little bit of a short, but I treated it accordingly based upon what we were doing on the larger time frames. I didn't look for a lot more on the pattern. I treated it as two separate shorts and just looked at those smaller impulse moves on the intraday time frames instead of going for, a bigger reversal trade that you guys would typically see at like a high where the momentum is shifting at the highs. So right now we're coming in, we're retesting the previous high here intraday. I'll show you that on a smaller time frame. The Russell's also hanging out around there. So it has potential. It could still do like a little bit of a 2T action in here, but it could just as easily go and, still keep on pushing or go into a base and break higher again. There's all kinds of upside potential still here because the momentum back and forth, pretty average both ways. It's not really shifting too much on the upside move. The upside is still pretty strong. Especially when we look at the tick charts, we actually have a little bit of an increase in momentum here compared to here. It's kind of hard to see on the 500. It's a little easier on the 200. Let me kind of widen that up. So you can see it's kind of picked up momentum a little bit there. So that can kind of push that up a little bit further. So really trading action right now is pretty scalpish. By the way, we've got a little baby to be on the 500 tick of oil at a midway point here right now. No confirmation on it yet, but I'll pull up oil here next since you guys are looking at oil here today too. So here is little potential to be here. Notice it's at the midway point. So we've got some bigger channel breaks. This is an even bigger channel break on the upside on the larger time frame. Pulse back to the midway zone, and then it's trying to kind of shift here again. That could still do a megaphone as a short later on though in the afternoon. So wouldn't get too married to this on the long side, just as more of a, again, day trade, scalp trade type of thing. I'm gonna go pull up the larger oil charts for you guys so you can see what's going on those, because they're kind of iffy right now. And I'll show you why. So on the larger chart of oil, I'm going to show you the 20,000 tick chart here first. And what we had was a really nice 2B. This looks almost exactly like what flipped the NASDAQ back around at that low here, just as we were heading into class. But it didn't do a nice, beautiful two-wave move higher. It kind of got stunted, went into the pullback. That meant that it wasn't forming a great little phoenix pattern to kind of get the bulls going again. It's something that has put a damper on the bullish bias. So when it came down in here and it tried to do a megaphone phoenix here, it couldn't get going. It should have offered confirmation right away if it was going to have a really strong move, and it just couldn't. So this makes it easier for this to try to do something like this, where it treats this like almost the two-way pullback here, and then goes into something like that, and then can flush again. So it might chop around the rest of the day, not really go anywhere, and even have a downside move as we go into next week. It's just not as bullish as it would have been if we had more of a nice, strong move here, and then it could even go into a megaphone or an inverse head and shoulders or something like that that could have brought it higher. So kind of iffy here. Really want to pay attention to much smaller time frames on the intraday chart right now today. I don't know that I will do too much additional trading on oil here today just because of this. I mean, 500 tick chart would be a good one to watch for strategies intraday. That's going to give you kind of a good overall feel on what's happening there. Let me pull up Russell. Show you what's going on the Russell here. So 60 minutes on the Russell is kind of, we had a tilted avalanche here, bringing this down, a little bit of shift in momentum here. But intraday on the tick charts, we actually had a reversal here. So it's right at the support from that congestion back there on the 4th or 5th. And then here, right at about that two-wave measured move coming out of that tilted avalanche. Again, that's what I was hoping we would get on that NASDAQ when I shorted it again. It just, didn't go into a clear pattern on the beginning of that first NASDAQ short rather. But on the 400 tick, what you can see here is a really nice shift in momentum. So it almost does a momentum reversal, but the spacing's not that good for the lows. Had a two-way drop and then did an extra flush and had a little baby phoenix. So I bought part of it there, but then it offered a confirmation in here as it was closer to the upper end of the channel. And right now what I'm expecting is that this can go out, it can do a bigger phoenix. So I have this offset right now. The remainder of my trade, I took part of it off here. I have offset the remainder of it with the micros and just waiting for this to try to develop a phoenix here and see what happens at that point. So that's kind of the shorter term of what I'm looking at. Let's pull up the longer. So the weekly, what you'll see is that it had a breakout. And what you'll see is that it tried to do that check mark as a buy, but the momentum was shifting compared to the first move. So this is making it harder as it's trying to get back up there. It's kind of going back and forth, and it can still make it back up there just with more of the back and forth type of action. Usually what we will see is that coming out of a Phoenix like this, when it's an extreme move up, you'll still get two waves out of it, but they'll be more like that, and they might even, go like that, and then they'll shift and turn around. So right now, that was a little bit stronger than what I just drew as a template, but the same overall idea could still happen here, where it just changes that momentum, but we aren't guaranteed that. So when this started to pull back really strongly here, it could have even pulled back into this range and then tried to gain momentum again, where it would basically treat that as a support zone and this as an early breakout. So you'll see a lot of cases where you'll get this break, especially if it's coming and moving off of the lows of the range. You'll get the break, and then it will pull back into the range, and then it will try to go, and you'll get that strong secondary move. So that was something that would also have been a possibility here. Now with this, rapid bounce here on the daily time frame, the odds of that happening are less. It would have to, still come back in here pretty strong. It could even shift momentum. And usually this zone right in here where it's about 50% of the range in the range, that's about where a lot of times it will pull back into. So a lot of traders will have break-even stops because they'll take the breakout, and then they'll get stopped out right before it takes off because of how they had their stops placed. There's ways that we can manage that where you're still not going to take a loss on the trade, but you use more of a technical means for managing the trades. But don't set your stop right at break even. That's a no-no. So those are a couple of things that, we are looking at here. As far as like the bullish side of things, that would be the best scenario, is something that kind of pulled back here a little bit faster and then shifted momentum into there to kind of go and add that next move up to a bit of a higher high on the weekly here. All right, so euro dollar, since I've got the euro dollar up here, we'll look at this one. We were looking at this yesterday for some continuation into the end of the day. It was getting really messy here. And it didn't quite make it back down to the lows before it did a tilted Phoenix. Daily time frame on this, what we have is basically what I just talked about on the Russell, where it pulled up sharply, but this one didn't go into a congestion. It had more of a little bit of a price pullback. And then see how this popped up and it kind of started going back and forth more. That's the type of action that is possible on that weekly time frame of the Russell. So this is the type of, one way that can come and play out here. So this is still looking like it's going to come back down into this zone of support here. We are on wave 3, so kind of can shift momentum. Each wave is kind of gaining momentum. So as this comes down into that low, that's a good place for it to shift momentum. It retraced more than 50% of the drop. So that makes that previous low zone a really good level of support. And that's where we'll see it start to chop around again. It's right in here. So it's going to get choppier there on the daily time frame. Weekly, we are trying to again regain that downside bias here. It had been just like going back and forth in here for a while. So what I was originally expecting was, we could get a kind of a tilted avalanche potential in here on the downside, and it's just taken a lot longer to really develop into something. But as you can see with that momentum shift that we were just looking at on the daily time frame, that's trying to bring that back down here. So even though it can chop around at this previous low zone on the daily time frame, the weekly is still looking like it can go to a lower low. So we could get like a 2-wave move in here to bring that back down into here throughout this year. So it still looks like we're going to get that downside again because it never offered any sort of bullish bias confirmation when it tried back here going into the summer of last year. So what we saw was the bearish bias again begin to take over. Donna says it still looks like a big old zone of pain. It does, but here it shifted that bias again, so it did have that little smaller confirmation. Get some of our other Forex loading here. We can go and flip over to TradeStation too, but pull up the dollar yen. By the way, the NASDAQ had a pretty nice looking avalanche off of that retest of highs. Watching that resistance here. Check that out. It's hard to see the avalanche on the 200, on the 500 tick. Let's see. You can see it here on the 100. It's a really wide one, but it has a beautiful 2-wave move in there. What we normally would see is volume drop off there too. So for those of you following on timeframes charts, this looks a lot like what we saw on that euro dollar, where this went into like that kind of zone of congestion. And then here was the 2-wave correction, but it did it with a megaphone instead on the NASDAQ. And so we are doing that breakdown on the euro dollar. So it's kind of the same type of activity here. So dollar yen, I've just been kind of about this one here. There's not really a good setup yet on the weekly at all. It really could break either way. If it goes to the upside, it could easily just be a flush. Same thing, if it breaks to the downside, it could flush and then creep back up here because spacing between these lows, we've got this 2-wave breakdown, and then it's kind of trying to go into a 2-wave correction, but it's not really anything happening here that catches my eye on the weekly. We can go down to smaller time frames though and see if there's anything there, but we had a little bit of, this trying to do like a midway momentum reversal, but it just couldn't offer any confirmation and it couldn't go into a bigger megaphone. So it's just not too exciting. It had a nice 2T on the 8,000 tick chart though. That was really pretty right here. Because see how it starts out fast and then it kind of shifts that momentum. I mean, that was a beautiful setup right there. But you're just down onto smaller time frames. So the 8,000 tick chart right now is a good one to watch for on the intraday charts for setups. This could go into like a bigger megaphone here is a possibility. Other ways this could play out, if this was a little bit slower, it could even go into like a shallow avalanche type of move here. It might still do that. It might still be able to flip around and do that. But there's so many possibilities here right now because of what's going on this chart that there's not really a huge bias for me. It's something that I would treat totally as scalper zone. Hold on, guys. I'm going to grab a sip quick. My tea. We'll pull up that peso. for you, Gil? Oil kind of did that extra flush. Oh, you know, what was it? One of you guys wanted me to look at something last week and it just wouldn't load for me. What was that chart? Was it copper? Might have been copper. It went and loaded after we were done with the session. It's because I had never looked at it on here because I just don't trade copper. So we might be able to get that to pull up faster here now. It was just trying to load all the historical data, so it took forever. I don't trade the peso either, so sometimes I get the two backwards. So is it USD MXN or MXN USD? I don't remember without putting them both in. I'm having like USD MXN. Okay, I got it right. I thought it was. It's just slow. We can look at this on TradeStation. That'll pop up faster too. Let's flip over there and do that quick. Sometimes I get Forex dyslexia. I get like the two flipped around. What comes first if it's something that I don't trade much? Daily on here is a little bit of a 2B, but it's really messy. Same thing with this monthly. You know, it looks like, oh shoot, there was something we were looking at earlier. It just didn't go right away. So this can go into a much longer trading range here on the monthly time frame, you know, even akin to what we had happening back here. It could go into a range for that long because it's trying to break down out of this little avalanche, but it just can't get going. I took a short like this on an intraday trade here this week. For those of you that are Liga traders, when you go back and watch the videos from this week, you'll see one example of something where I took a trade very much like this. And I think it was on the Russell, but I only held it for like that little bottom and then it popped back up and kind of went messy. So I don't really see a setup here on the monthly yet, at least nothing new because it couldn't get going on the avalanche. So here's where it should have gained momentum there. And really, it should have broken a little bit earlier too. So we would have liked to have seen that kind of break a little bit better. Ideally, what you would get is an invert, is a head and shoulders there. So you can see how that time development would have played out if that had happened. And it just is not giving us that confirmation, which makes me worry that it's going to come back up into this range for those of you that are like more bearish on this. On the daily time frame, it's supported by this trying to do a little bit of a 2B here, but I have seen these fail because as this is coming into this 2B, there's a lot of indecision here. So if this had had kind of like a smoother two-wave move down and then you got a 2B, it can bounce a little bit better. But a daily chart, watch out for this as it comes into the upper end of that channel because that's where things can kind of get choppier again. But if it's going to hold, it's going to hold here. I don't think it would go into a head and shoulders here, an inverse head and shoulders. I think if it's going to work, it's going to pull up here and it might even go into like a megaphone and do like another better 2B over here before it tries to pop. That's actually what I would consider to be an ideal pattern to get that to turn around more easily. So what would happen is it would come up here, it would come up to a bit of a higher high. It would come back down here, you know, preferably to a lower low, do a little tiny shift in momentum right here, and then get going at that point. And that's what would take it back up to levels like this. So if that unfolds, that would be a really strong buy zone there. But that's where I would want to see it to get, you know, that bigger. bigger move. Let me check. Intraday, here's the 5-minute. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit slow coming off that to be on the 5-minute. It's doing it, but it's a little bit slow. That means this zone here, this is our target, our typical target zone intraday on a 2B is right there. So that's what you're looking at as resistance. My trade station is a little bit delayed here, but that's what we're looking at for a resistance level. Oil is still holding that support zone where it's trying to do that 2B. It did that extra little flush. So we might get a little pop here on oil, just as like a scalp right now. Got a 2-way pullback on the Russell on the 500 tick. So it's almost to where it needs to hold support. I don't know if I've still got the Russell chart up here. Yeah, here's the Russell. So see, here's the 2-wave. It's actually a little bit stronger than I wanted. Again, I have the rest of my position offset. So notice the distance between these lows here. So as it comes into that even spacing, it's a do or die point. So for the bulls, it has to hold that zone in order to get that trend to turn around more here today. All right, let's see. I'm just scrolling back up through your guys' questions. Gold, since we're talking currencies and stuff, let's pull up that gold. Gold has been really pretty on this 100 tick chart here throughout the day today. I kind of go in phases trading gold and oil. So like I might go, a week or something without trading them, and then suddenly I'm trading them all the time again. And that has been the case here this week with gold and oil. Just they've been really active. So what you'll see here is that we had a momentum reversal, but it was a little bit slower. We didn't have like the perfect V's and inverse V's, but really nice spacing. So it went to a momentum reversal plus. So that's the pattern that we have here. And it's actually a very good template to use for the momentum reversal plus. So that turned this back around here. It's still kind of struggling to get going though on the 100 tick, but let me show you what's going on the bigger time frames. We're kind of in the midst of much bigger congestion zone on like the monthly and the weekly time frame because it spiked on those time frames. I'm long as investment on gold still, and then just trading some of the smaller stuff. Let me show you guys that. How long have I been long gold? Ooh, a couple of years. So here's the gold. Here's the turnaround. You can see the little baby phoenix here. And then it kind of gained that nice momentum here. This was originally where things were kind of flipping and turning around on gold, which really looked nice. And then we had the 2-way pullback, and then we're getting this trying to turn around back again here. So we're really in like a congestion zone, but it could still just keep pulling up here. So I'm still bullish on this. It's just at, right at this resistance over here. And that's what's kind of stalling things a little bit. I'll grab a weekly for you. The weekly is kind of doing what NASDAQ is doing intraday, but not exactly. It's just it had a little bit of that pivot high. Whoops, it didn't grab my chart here. So here you can see that when that pulled back there, it had that little baby 2T like I showed you guys on the NASDAQ on the intraday. And then here was the avalanche equivalent. So, it would have been shorting here and then re-shorting here, like the chart that I showed you of the NASDAQ when we started. And so it came back up to the previous highs faster than the NASDAQ did though, but it's at that level of resistance here. So this could go, it could do 1, 2, 3 and keep going. It could go into a smaller or sorry, a bigger check mark. So you can see this is typical correction period. So it has that potential to go into that time frame for correction before it tries to go again. So that's a possibility here. Again, because this is at a zone that it can go into more of a corrective mode, it's not going to be as of interest for me for immediate continuations. It could do a smaller little continuation, but once it goes past about there, it will have a harder time breaking any of these previous highs until about here. So here and then here would be the two zones that would be do or die points for new bulls trying to get a setup on like a daily time frame. So that's what we've got on gold. Here you can see this is the do or die point on that Russell. Hold on just a second, you guys. And no trigger on that oil. It's pushed through the support. So it shifted that momentum, but couldn't get going on it. It just ended up continuing to base out. Just looking through some of the other charts, see what we've got happening right now. Okay, let's look at some of our stocks for you guys. Eek, I didn't realize time got away from me again. That always happens, right? Before I know it, an hour has passed. Wynn Resorts. Ooh, ouch. That is what you call a pretty good bull trap there. This zone here on Wynn's probably going to chop. Let me go up to the weekly. See if I've got one open here, monthly. Okay, weekly is looking more like an avalanche. So that does support more of the chop on the daily right here, because this is wave 1 and then you've got wave 2. If we look at, even spacing, you're looking at this China breakdown over here, kind of pulling back a little bit faster than we would get for that breakdown though. So kind of, playing that out further that way at this point is what we're looking at. I don't see anything to suggest the bulls will regain control yet. What would have to happen for that is it would need to shift here, not break when it has that even spacing. And then it could even pull back down here and still manage to go up, where it would treat like a 2-wave here and kind of flip back around. That's what it would have to do to get the bulls back on. Let's go on the monthly. Yeah, it doesn't look so good for those bulls here on the monthly either. It's still doing an avalanche. The one thing that is tricky about this avalanche is that this momentum is so extreme here on the downside that on a breakdown, that's where it has potential to kind of shift momentum as it tries to break down and not really get a really rapid, clean break coming out of that. So that is what could have that potential to try to shift that back up again, where it struggles to really get a solid avalanche going. It's because of this momentum. So even though it has the two-wave correction, extreme momentum into that two-wave correction can impact its ability to follow through as well. Apple, pretty much runaway momentum. There's not any trade. We're getting the widening up we were looking at. It's just kind of holding, continuing the widening up. So what we often see here is that we'll have a smaller widening up period, and then that can flip and even go into a bigger widening up period. So I expect it to continue to be really, really volatile up at these levels here. And there's no larger time frame pattern for this right now. You know, it's still going with the momentum on the bigger time frame, but it's at zones where we can have a lot more of the flushes happening, which is what we've been seeing. So this is, you know, not anything that looks like much on a weekly or a monthly time frame, but it's something that can then go and start to have bigger ramifications on the larger time frame with some of these bigger, more volatile swings now coming in. See here, this extreme drop here, and then it went into the avalanche here on the daily on Amazon. That extreme move, and then the avalanche, and then it just doesn't follow through and kind of, you know, played out. That's what I was talking about. This is the type of thing that could happen on Win. You know, it just doesn't get that strong momentum going again, even with the two-wave correction. And in the case of Amazon, it did break down and it had a decent move, but it wasn't extreme. You know, it was nowhere on par with the first drop. So that's what I was warning about happening with Win. Right now, this can push further. We'll usually see this try to continue to go higher with this type of action, but again, it can start to look like what we saw on Apple, where it kind of has more of the volatile back and forth moves. A lot of times when you get an extreme gap like this and it pushes to continue, there's a lot more overlap from bar to bar as it tries to continue, and then the risk of flushes will increase as well. So it's not really a great spot for swing traders to be looking for new positions. You can see even here on the intraday that, you know, this is poised. This is something that can have these extreme intraday flushes. The monthly on this still can push higher. So it can do that overlap, 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 overlap as it just keeps pushing up. A lot of times when you get a continuation like this, what you've got happening here is it has the check mark. So that's that zone right in here. It will pop up. It can do like overlap, 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 another pop up, and that will, you know, kind of widen things up, and then it can turn around at that point. So that's what we could see happening. So yeah, Karen, you just asked, could I give a look at Amazon for pullback or continuation? So yeah, that's what I would expect is, you know, it could go into more of a choppier type of thing, maybe do like a tilted continuation in there. See, what other stocks did you guys have? Tesla. Tesla. Whoops, wrong button. My wind did something wonky to my chart. Like mirrored it over here. I don't know what I did. Anyways, So yeah, we were looking at Tesla becoming more volatile again, but wow, did it deliver on the volatility. So here's that two wave, and it has just gone bonkers. So now you're looking at Bitcoin 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago, right? Or was it last year? I don't know without pulling up Bitcoin, but it had like the same type of extreme move. So this is something where it's usually going to be pretty good for swing traders, but realize that the size of your stops are going to be pretty darn huge. You might want to be using options instead. Not much of an options trader, but this is the type of thing where you can get moves that will come in and create an avalanche and pull back down. But we've also seen ones, and I talked about this in League of Traders here this week. We've also seen ones where it will go back up here, do that high, and then turn back around. So that is certainly possible here with Tesla, with the way it's performing. It's really hard to say right now. We just know that it's going to have still have more volatile swings in here, probably for a good couple of months before things start to settle down a little bit. Yeti still always makes me smile when I pull that up. So this is trying to do a little bit of a reversal pattern. You've got a little bit of a 2T here. It's holding on the daily. Where'd my weekly go? Whoops. I hit it somewhere. It's almost like a Momo 2T pattern where this is going to be a zone of contention where if it's going to turn around, it would turn around right here. But there's many of cases where this exact pattern, the predictability on how it reacts at this level is a lot lower than other strategies. So you'll usually get reaction off of that zone and you'll get a pullback, but we'll see things where it will go into range and then just continue higher, just like we saw happening on that daily chart of Tesla. So it's not really something that is necessarily a huge reversal. There will be instances where it does go and gain momentum on the downside, but it's not as predictable that that will happen. So it's just more of a predictability that, yeah, it's at a good zone that it will most probably go into a correction, but how that correction will unfold doesn't have a strong probability. So we'll see a lot of variations of how that correction unfolds, and it comes down to basically what's going to happen on the daily charts within that correction to determine if it's able to do that second wave up. But it could easily have that correction into this zone. So it's about the same amount of time there to there before it gets another really strong move. So when we go into like the wave counting here, you can see two waves up here, and then I would count this as a two-wave correction. And so we only have one wave back up. So maybe it does one more little push before it goes into that correction, whatever that correction ends up being. So here's a pretty good 2T on this intraday. And this could widen up. It could go into a megaphone here. This is like the do or die point. If it's going to go into a megaphone, it would hold this zone here. And that could bring in that extra move there on that daily charts. So holds this zone, kind of shifts a little bit more maybe, then that could bring up that widening up there again. And then it'll go into that bigger correction there. FXI, avalanche. So that's looking to break lower here. A little bit of support at the previous low, so it could stall it for a little bit. Timing's not great between the lows yet for a full breakdown. If it tries to break the low here, easier chance that it could pop back up into the channel because it would be a little bit too fast. But ultimately, I think it's aiming for this zone over here. Monthly, that makes sense too. It's probably not as fast of a drop here, but it could still come into that zone in there. That's what I would be looking for. See, it doesn't have a huge drop in the volume here. There's some of a drop, but it's not huge. So you would expect more of a drop in a volume to get an extreme break of that range. So the fact that it's not an extreme drop in volume means that even trying to break down, you've got more people that are going to hold on to it. So it's probably not going to get the momentum going on that downside past what we saw this week. All right, let's see here. I'm gonna see if I can get that copper pulled up for you, Karan. Hold on. I don't have copper futures on this computer, so we'll go pull it up over here. Okay, so let me pull that up here. So I'm gonna start with kind of some of the bigger time frames. My charts don't go all the way back, but I've got pretty good clock of data on here for you. So here's the monthly. It just shows, the last couple of years or so. And what we have here is a pattern that typically this comes back into these previous lows. So as this is kind of forming here, I would still expect this to try to creep down further into this zone on that monthly time frame. Now, if we go and look at the weekly here, what you can see is that we had this mega launch, but what happened? It had that extreme momentum move into it. So as this tries to continue here, it stalled when it came to the lower end of that megaphone. And even though it's still trying to head lower, it can still keep changing that momentum so that the overall drop here is just kind of goes back and forth as it creeps lower. So that's what I would expect based upon what's happening right now on this. Let me show you guys the daily now. So here's the daily. So we had a 2T right here. And that 2T was helped out because it started to shift momentum first to a correction, then went to a 2T. So that helped drive the selling here, even though coming out of this Phoenix, it gained momentum. Because typically the pattern we would see that would drive momentum further off of a low like this, where you've got your inverse head and shoulders, then you've got your Phoenix, is this would go to a 1, 2, 3. So really this should have gone faster on the upside. Right about there really is about all the correction, like this amount of time. That's all we would have expected for a correction before it would lead to a continuation. And it would have been more of a solid base. So this would be a smooth move. It would correct, could do it as a megaphone, and then it would go and have that secondary move, and then it would widen up. That is typically how that would have to play out. So it didn't offer that confirmation, and it changed the momentum, drove the selling back down here. So now it's basically just taking over what we just saw in that bigger time frame. So smaller time frame here, this can go and widen up again at this point, do another flush. Right, it's kind of hard to see what I'm drawing right now, but one pattern that forms here is it go like that and then can pop a little bit there. So that's one pattern that can form right here too. This is probably news driven as well. Yep. Yeah, usually something like this, you've got a news event, but it was already predicting this by how it performed here. So like technically you had that technical prediction too. All right, you guys, so thank you for joining me here today, and I am going to head on out, and I will see you back here next week. So have a wonderful weekend, you guys. For those of you that would like to join me, we're planning to do like a get together in Vegas in November. So keep your eye out in the League of Traders on the Telegram forum and things like that. I'll give you, some more details as we get things firmed up. But anybody that wants to go to Vegas in November, I am heading there. I don't do the gambling part when I'm there, so we will figure out some other stuff. It could be anywhere from getting together for drinks or dinner to some sort of class event. Just kind of depends upon what you guys decide you want to do. So we're just in the very, very early stages of that. But that is the second week of November for the Money Shows um, International Traders Expo. The name was kind of getting tripped up there on my tongue. So just wanted to put a heads up for you there. All right, you guys, I will see you back here next week. And for those of you joining me for League of Traders, next week we are talking about trend development. So we're going to go everywhere from the basics to the extremes. Right now we're planning it out for a week. We'll see if it ends up being 2 weeks or not. But that's what's coming up here starting on Monday.